bikers in Indiana at a middle school, all to help one sixth grader.
We want to get it out there that bullying is not cool. Bikers are against bullying.
When Phil Mick told his mom he was having suicidal thoughts after being bullied at school, she called the owner of a nearby bike shop for help. Brent Warfield says Phil's story broke his heart, and his motorcycle friends wanted to help.
We just want to come together as a big community and help Phil and show him that we're there to support him during his rough times for him.
The next year, the bikers met with Phil and his family for breakfast before heading off to the boys' first day. With his new friends behind him, Phil smiled ear to ear, and his confidence carried into the following days.
Goes to school happy, comes home happy, and that just makes us all feel so great.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
Good morning.
That. Awesome. Hey, welcome, New Break Ocean Beach. I'm Carter Moss, pastor here. Welcome to OB. Glad you're here. Welcome back. Or if it's your first time, thanks for checking it out. We'd love to meet you afterwards. You've already met Drew. He's like double duty today. He leads our youth. He's been leading worship. Now I'm making him speak too. It's like, man, we're doing all this. I'm still waiting for him to invite me to co-worship lead, though, because he hasn't invited me into that. Is it because you care about them too much to put them through it? Yeah. No, I love getting to do this together. Part of it is just to keep it fresh for you guys, let you hear a fresh perspective. And Drew's got awesome insights. Man, he speaks every week to our junior high and high school students. So I want you guys to get more of a taste of that. Plus, we're always about developing people. As you see every week, he's developing future worship leaders, and I want to keep developing future preachers. And so we just love God kind of working through that. But we both found that video this week, and I just thought it was a cool story. Maybe you'd seen it. I haven't seen that before. A few other schools around the country have done that. But I thought, how cool, man. For a kid, you get to walk in and have like a biker gang come in with him, right? Just think about kind of the confidence of that kid who's been bullied. And part of why it resonated with us is we both have had experiences with bullies. And for me, I was back about 7th grade in Catholic school. I was kind of riding home from school on my bike, and a kid. Now, you got to keep in mind, I was not this fine physical specimen that you're seeing now, which I know it's hard to imagine me scrawnier since there's such build here now. No, but anyway, I was scrawny, super shy, man, super quiet. And yeah, kid, I'm riding on my bike, and he just shoves me off my bike. I get up, he shoves me into the bushes, and like, come on, trying to pick a fight. And I wouldn't fight back. I mean, honestly, I was just cowering in fear. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. I was just way overwhelmed, scared kind of thing. Luckily, he finally backed off and went home. I go home totally shaken up. And a few months later, it's summer break, don't have to deal with them anymore. And my first day at the swimming pool that summer, I saw him there. And he couldn't do anything, so lifeguard's there, but he's just watching me the whole time and kind of following me around. And I hate to say it, I let him get the best of me. I didn't go back to the pool all summer long. Just didn't swim all summer because I just didn't want to deal with him. Now, the really embarrassing part, don't ever say I don't just open up my heart and bleed in front of you because, yeah, he picked on me. He was 2 grades younger than me. So that was kind of embarrassing. He thought it was so cool to pick on a 7th grader. And he's right. That is actually pretty impressive. So that was pretty embarrassing. I just depressed everybody. Can you tell your story? Because it's way better. Mine's just sad. I'm sad. So, don't lose respect for me. I'm sorry.
It's okay, man.
Yeah.
Maybe he was big. He could have been big.
He was.
And you may have been small.
He was bigger than me.
It's okay.
Younger.
So my story is a little different. So mine is, when you're in 5th grade, so I was in 5th grade during this time period, and you have a close friend who some other people move into the school, and they become friends with that crowd and kind of leave your crowd. So that's what had happened. 2 guys had came to the school, and so my really best friend became friends with him and stopped being friends with me. And so me and another friend that I had became closer friends with, and I realized I've said the word friends about 35 times in the last 2 sentences, so there's a lot of friends. And so we became close friends. We're playing kickball. Just a riveting game of kickball. And I'm doing what I like. I don't want to call it trash talking. It's more like loving discouragement to the other team. So we're telling the other team, you suck, whoops. And so they're getting angry. We win. I mean, we just beat the brakes off of them. I think it was like 20-5 or something like that. And so I decided that I was going to walk up the hill back to class. So our gym was at the bottom, a big hill up at the top was our class. I was going to walk by myself. I was feeling good. I'm like, oh, man, we just get kickball. Let's go. So we start walking up the hill, and I don't have anyone with me. And those 3 guys come out from around the back of the building. And I'm like, well, giddy up, right? Let's go.
Yeah. 3-on-1.
3-on-1. And so the first one comes to me, and so my dad taught me, never throw the first punch, just finish the fight, don't start it. So the first guy, shoves me, and so the first thing I do, wham, right in his face. And I'm in 5th grade, right? And so then, like Chuck Norris, watch a lot of Chuck Norris, or try to roundhouse kick, miss. He kicks me in the shin. I mean, next thing you know, I'm at the bottom of a pile just like this. Luckily, the friend that we had just been trash talking together finally shows up, kind of helps me out. By then, the PE teacher comes, and we were suspended from PE in 5th grade. This is 5th grade. For the rest of that quarter, which was another 8 weeks long. Whoa. And so we had to sit in the principal's office, all because a bully picked on me.
Whoa. You stood up, though. I picture him as like Neo in The Matrix, where you're there and all these Mr. Andersons are coming at you, and you're, the reason we talk about bullies, we want to talk about the idea today of how do we stand up? How do you stand up against the things that you're facing in your life? I don't know if you know who your real enemy is, actually. If you were here last week, we talked about it, and you can watch that online if you missed it. We talked about the real enemy in our life. Your real enemy isn't your ex, and it's not the IRS or the government, and it's not people on the other political party than you, and it's not the people that are, it's not pro-Target against anti-Target, or people in OB versus people in any other beach town. That we actually have a real enemy out there. That actually the biggest battle that we're in is a spiritual battle. I know not everybody buys that whole idea. We talked last week about, think about this. There is an invisible battle going on that you all believe in, and it's kind of crazy because it feels a little science fiction-y, but we all believe that there's invisible germs floating around all the time in our world. None of us has ever seen one, but I got to prepare myself against them all the time, right? Otherwise, I'm going to get the flu. Some of our team's gone today with that. Are going to get sick. This time of year, some of you're bathing in hand sanitizer, right? Taking airborne virus. I've never seen germs. I just believe that they're there and they're trying to hurt me. That's what spiritual battle's like. Right? You don't see them, it doesn't mean they don't exist. Right? That there aren't other forces against you. Here's encouraging news about though. That's why we talk about it, because so many Christians that start so excited about their faith, and they get into their faith, and then they just life gets hard, right? And so then maybe it's kind of like, well, maybe God doesn't love me that much. Maybe I'll never figure out how to be a Christian. Maybe this life just wasn't meant for me. And we get all discouraged and just wonder, why can't I seem to figure this out? Why can't I get this to work for me? And part of the encouraging news is because there are forces working against you that don't want it to. And so it isn't just that you're not good enough or God's kind of abandoned you. It's a little more like, instead of me being so surprised by life being hard, and if you've ever had those weeks or years where you feel like, and I meet people like, Carter, I just feel like everything's against me right now. Man, I can't catch a break. Nothing's going my way. And now you and I can go, but I kind of knew that was coming, right? I'm not surprised by it. So we talked last week, more I understand spiritual battle. I'm not meant to be afraid of it, all right? So we never speak in fear here. Fear doesn't come from God. So we're not meant to be afraid of it. I'm meant to be aware and prepared. I'm meant to be aware of germs so I can prepare for them. I'm meant to be aware of spiritual battle so I can prepare for it. And so that's why we've been talking about it, because we've been working our way through this letter that the Apostle Paul, remember, he's a guy who is very anti-Jesus. Then he meets Jesus. So now the rest of his life he spends telling everybody else who Jesus is and how amazing his grace is. And so Paul, he gets imprisoned for his faith. He's been writing letters to churches to encourage them, churches full of people that are new to the faith. And this is one of those letters, Ephesians, because it's a church in Ephesus. And so we've been studying this actually over half of the year we spent in this one little 6-chapter book in the Bible, just trying to kind of dive deep, see what God might speak to us through it. We made it to the end, though. We're in the last 2 weeks, this week and next week, and then we'll get to talk about Christmas stuff. So here we are at the very end of the letter, and Paul's been writing in this whole letter, here's what it means to be a Christ follower. Here's how it's meant to change your identity. Here's how to live out the Christian life, all these practical ways we've talked through, your marriage, your job, your parenting. And then we get to the very end, and I kind of picture Paul being like, oh, wait a minute, one last thing you need to know. One last thing, you got to get this. All the other stuff I've said about living out the Christian life, if you miss this part, it's just not going to work. You got to know that there's a spiritual battle going on, that it's not going to be easy. But here's the good news. He doesn't just say there's a spiritual battle, so good luck with that, and I hope you figure it out. He says, but God's given you everything you need. And so this week, it's good you're here because we get to talk through the super practical things that God gives us that if you figure this stuff out, I was wondering for some of us, maybe this is the missing piece. We feel like I've been around church, I've tried to do the Christian life my whole life, but feel like I'm never getting anywhere, I'm never winning. Maybe it's because we've never used any of these tools that God gave us. So super practical today. Paul lays it out like this. It says in verse 13, he's been talking about there's a real spiritual battle. Therefore, put on the full armor of God. That's his metaphor. He's going to paint this whole picture for you of armor. We can understand that, right? Even living in 2018, that metaphor makes sense to us. Put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, it's really the days that we face every day, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you've done everything, you'll stand. You can stand firm, and now he lays out the armor. Stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot there, right? But we're going to talk through each of those pieces of armor, and they're all actually really practical practices that you can do if we learn how to put those on. I think part of why Paul uses armor as his metaphor, because we tend to talk and write about stuff that we see every day. Remember where Paul is? He's in prison. So every day, some would say he's chained directly to a guard, or there's a guard always at the door. So every day, all he looks at is people just standing in armor. So I wonder if he's like, oh yeah, walking with God's kind of like these guys. And he's a guy who doesn't just write about having the armor of God. He's worn it. All right? And you need to know that because I think we're less likely to listen to people we think like easy for you to say, guy who lived a cushy Christian life, but that wasn't Paul. I mean, his whole life, man, was tough. Even after becoming a Jesus follower, persecution in his life actually got harder than before he was. And so he's a guy who knows what it means to wear the armor. You can read his story, actually, is in the book of Acts in the New Testament, right after the Gospels. And in Acts 20:21, you read about Paul. He's been traveling the known world, planting churches, telling people about the grace of God. He says, all right, he tells all his close friends, here's where God's sending me next. To Jerusalem, a few other towns around there. The problem is God warned me, nothing but trouble and hardship await you. And all his friends say what we would say as good friends, well, don't go then. Don't go. Please stay here. We want you to be safe. Stay with us. He says, I got to go. God's calling me there. And so he walks in. It's a really hard situation. Some of you know that feeling. You've walked into jobs. You've had to move. You've walked into some family gatherings, some relational conflicts where, man, you're scared, overwhelmed, intimidated, kind of like facing bullies. And Paul had to walk into that. And he was able to navigate through all of that trouble and persecution that was promised, came his way, and he made it through. And he did it because he understood the armor of God. So he writes about it, and he knows about it. And so he tells us. So if you want to endure the storms of life coming your way, and some of you are in it right now, and if you're not, well, it's probably coming, but sorry for the bet. You're like, thanks for that one. I'm really glad I got up and came here. But no, but we know, right? So storms kind of come and go. So he says this, so you got to put on the armor of God. That means you're not already wearing it. I don't have it by default, so I'm going to have to be intentional. That makes sense. If I've just been drifting through my Christian life, never being intentional, well, I shouldn't be surprised that I'm not getting anywhere. I have to do something. I got to put it on. And then notice it says it's the armor of God. So it's not our armor. It's not like I need you to fight harder in your own strength, grit your teeth, come on, you can do it. He's saying, no, I need to put on, it's actually God's armor. Actually, what's cool, Paul didn't make up this whole armor metaphor. I never realized this, but in the Old Testament, in the book of Isaiah, in chapter 59, God says, I see my people who are oppressed. I see my people that everybody else forgot about. And he says, and I'm going to go fight for them. I'm going to put on my breastplate of righteousness and my belt of truth. He talks about some of the same pieces of armor. So it was initially God wearing them. So I love that Paul, and he knows the Old Testament really well. And so I think he takes that and says, by the way, that armor that God used to wear, he gave it to you, and now you get to wear it. Because one thing you got to notice is that here in Ephesians, when Paul's talking about spiritual battle, he's never saying that we need to go out and fight against all these kind of demonic forces. I know there's lots of action movies about that, and, it makes for a great movie. It doesn't make for a very good lifestyle. He says over and over, you're meant to stand. We've got to stand. You stand for him. You're meant to stand where God put you right now. You stand in his blessing. You stand in the things he's called you to do, and things are going to work against you and come fighting against it, and it's your job to stand in his armor and to resist. But God gave us actually 7 pieces of armor. We'll just hit the first 4 today that we read, but super, super practical, all right? So let's get into it. Let's go.
So we go to the first part that he gives us. He says, stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist. Some translations say tighten the belt. Some say fasten. But it's this idea that the belt is the center of the person, right? And so I'm going to show you a picture. And this was a first century Roman soldier. This is what the average soldier would have looked like. And notice it's a little bit different than what you may have seen in the movies and stuff. You see a lot of plate armor in the movies. So that would have came later in the Roman Empire. So while Paul was kind of writing Ephesians and going through the process and through his story, this is what Roman guards, legionnaires, soldiers would have looked like. And you notice that it's a chain mail, and that chain mail weighed approximately 40 to 50 pounds before they put anything else on. And so it was pretty heavy, much like military today, you kind of learn to operate with the weight of your armor. And so these Roman soldiers, so you notice too that the soldier has attached to it a belt. They would also attach different pieces of armor based on what they were doing in the Roman army, different kind of things. It was also a status symbol. So when they fastened that belt, that was a sign that they were ready for battle. And so just like Christ followers, when we put on our armor, he starts with that belt. We tighten that up and we get ready to go. And so the first kind of command is buckle up. And so these Roman centurions, they would have this belt and it would take the pressure off. They would also hold their sword. So obviously you would not want to go into battle without a weapon. And so they had to have some place to attach that, and they would attach it to this. And so he calls this belt the belt of truth, because truth is kind of foundational to the rest of the armor. Truth is required in order for the rest of the armor to kind of fit. So much like him with the chain mail and with his weapon, it was central to the Roman soldier in his armor. It is central to us as believers to start with truth. Not just truth in the word, but truth that we tell ourselves. The truth that we think of throughout the day. When our mind is kind of allowed to wander and run free. What are we telling ourselves? What are we thinking of? What are we dwelling on? Those truths are just as important as the truth known as the Bible. And we have to. So his first command is you have to buckle up. You have to get a hold of the truth that you're telling yourself, the truth that you're dwelling on. When things come your way, when problems arise, when the enemy starts attacking, what's the truth? And so how do we kind of buckle up? How do we get the truth established? We have 2 ways. One is we change the narrative. So this whole kind of message series has been about, the things that we can't see in those battles. And so if there's a battle that's going on that we can't see, the armor is also something that we can't see. And so in 2 Corinthians, it talks about take every thought captive. Is how it ends. Take every thought captive. So your truth, the truth that you allow yourself to believe, the truth that you're constantly thinking on, when you're at work and something happens, something goes wrong, whose truths are you leaning in on? Whose truths are you listening to? Are you telling yourself, hey, I am a child of God. He knows who I am. I know who I am in him. I'm created in his image. When the enemy starts to attack you, with your less than, with those thoughts of, I'm not good enough. Whose truths do you choose to believe? Whose truths do you run to? And so that first thing is change that thought process, change those minds. One of our other pastors calls it stinking thinking. Hold on to that. And the second one is fill your mind with more truths from the Word, truths that you can tell yourself, that you can rest in. Philippians 4:8, it says this. Excuse me. So it says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about those things. Are we thinking about things that are praiseworthy? Are we thinking about those noble things? Because here's the deal about truth. There's no amount, the belt of truth, there is no amount of California burritos that you can eat that will make that belt not fit right. Right? Truth grows with you. Yeah.
That's good news right
Yeah,
there.
good news, because we can eat all the Cali burritos we want. This belt will stop fitting, but that belt of truth will stay on. And you don't want to run into battle and your pants fall down, right? That is a very bad battle stance. And so that second part is filling your mind with truth. Filling your mind with things that are noble, that are praiseworthy. 2 years ago, my wife and I were in one of the biggest financial, actually not one of, the biggest financial crisis we had ever had personally. And at first, I've been a Christ follower for a while, and at first I was holding on to it, right? I was like, okay, he's going to be my provider. He's my rock. He's here with me. But then it was months, right? And the months turns into 3 months, into 6 months, 9 months. And those truths that I began to tell myself, or the truths that I was telling myself at the beginning, they start to whittle away. They start to become less apparent. I start to get confused until one day I'm ending up on my couch and I'm like just weeping and I'm crying and I'm like, God, I thought you were going to provide for me. And I start questioning God. Because I'd lost the truth that he wasn't going to put me through anything that I couldn't bear. He was going to provide for me. He wasn't going to let my life all destroy and fall apart and in shambles. And I started to look at what I can do. Well, maybe I need to do this. Maybe I need to change jobs. Maybe, you start running this race inside of your mind that has you chasing after these truths that are not actual truths, but they're what the enemy starts putting into your head because he wants to make it hard, because he doesn't want you to stay in this fight for long. So I had to reset. I had to come back to the truth that God was going to provide, that it was going to be okay. So we have to fill our mind with those truths, and that belt becomes central to kind of the rest of the armor that we're going to talk about through the rest of this message.
No, that's good. I appreciate you being honest, sharing that story. I mean, part of what's cool with truth is we remind each other of it. I mean, now that Drew's gone through that and kind of having to learn the truth that God is provider, now he reminds me of the truth. There's times when I get kind of anxious, as pastors do, about financial things at the church and stuff, and then Drew reminds the truth. Don't forget, Carter, God's the provider. Man, we're dreaming too small. God can bring anything. So I love just that, that God speaks that truth to us and then kind of through us. So Paul starts with belt. Now he moves on and he talks about, really the most important organ to protect, our heart. We're not going to last long in battle without that. So protect our heart. So what's the all-important piece of armor, the thing in our life that protects the most important part of us? And he says it's the breastplate of righteousness. What in the world is that? I mean, that's a churchy phrase if I've ever heard one, right? Breastplate of righteousness. What is righteousness? That's a word I heard all the time growing up in church, but I was always like, I'm not totally sure if I know what it means. Righteous, really even outside of the Bible or of church, the word righteous, it doesn't just mean like righteous dude, like not just like that, but like when we call people self-righteous, righteous really just means morally acceptable, morally justifiable. That's why we would call someone self-righteous, because they come off as kind of morally superior. Everything I do is morally justifiable, and the stuff you do isn't, and it's all because of me. So we say self-righteous. Righteousness, when it comes to our faith, it's about, am I morally acceptable before God? Am I righteous before God? And I think where we get lost there, not all of us, but at least for me, kind of grew up in the kind of church where I'm like, here's how I get morally right before God, is I just got to get really good at doing good. If I can get good at doing more good and good at doing less bad, then I can hopefully do enough good to be morally righteous before God, in right standing before God. There's a comedian who says, this is how I know God's going to let me into heaven, because I love people, I'm nice to kittens and puppies, and I always refill the rental car with premium gas. And so, right, so we can think like, all right, I'm righteous if I can just get really good enough at being good. Here's the problem. None of us can. I mean, we We just can't. None of us is ever going to get good enough at being good enough all the time. We just can't do it. You can't. Drew can't. I can't. Mother Teresa didn't. She can't. Billy Graham can't. Right? So that's why Christians, even though we've been labeled this sometimes, we're never self-righteous. Because we know it ain't coming from self. Like, I don't have what it takes. That's kind of the world I lived in growing up, man. Always spinning my wheels, always plagued with guilt. Like, why can't I seem to be good enough? And so righteousness instead, I know Paul calls it a breastplate. I like to think of it as a coat because of my favorite story that Jesus ever told where he said, there was this dad once and his kid totally rebelled. He left the house, took all the money in the will and just blew it. Went to somewhere like Vegas and just had a great old time. It was a good time, not going to lie. Right? I mean, he had a great time, man. He blew through money about as fast as you can, did about everything he's ever wanted to try doing, and then he hit rock bottom. Yeah. Crashed and burned, got nothing left. Literally no option other than, I guess I'll go begging and groveling, crawling back home. Maybe Dad will let me stay in the doghouse or something. And so he goes home and expects Dad to be waiting there going, oh, you're going to get what's coming to you, right? I'm about to teach you not to do that. And instead he comes back home and Dad comes running out with his arms wide open and gives him this big old hug and throws this really fine, the nicest robe that they have on him, this coat, and puts the rings on his fingers and says, go throw a party. My son once was lost and now he's found. And then that became a famous song later. And it's this beautiful picture. And that coat that dad puts on that kid who doesn't deserve it, that's righteousness. That's what God says. You know where it comes from? It's not self-righteousness. Right? Here's how you get right before me. Let me put it on you. And so Paul says, you want to know the one thing that's going to guard my heart? Is I need to remember that. You know how you know when you've forgotten it? When you feel shame. When you feel guilt. I believe shame and guilt never come from God. Now, conviction comes from God. Conviction of the Holy Spirit. When you're about to do something, I know this isn't totally right, but I kind of feel like doing it anyway. Now, that's conviction. But if you're ever feeling shame, still beating yourself up, kind of guilt over things you've done in the past, you don't have any code of righteousness on. You forgot that God says, yeah, I know. I already know you screwed up. I'm the one who made you right before me. And so Paul says, you want to guard your heart? You got to come back to that over and over and over. You come back to the prodigal son story. You come back to the communion table and to your baptism, and you remember, I made you right before me. I think, yeah, I do need that, right? I do need that thing to guard my heart. Otherwise, I'm telling you, the rest of your Christian life, that will plague you. It's because we forget this piece of it. So how do we wear this well? How do we remember it, keep it on? And we'll get super practical with each one of these. One is, well, I got to know my weaknesses then. Where do I tend to fall? Because, it's kind of like now that God put it on me and said, you're right before me, I'm not meant to go, hey, thanks for that, and sort of spit in his face and go back to living how I was. I'm meant to actually live into the identity, right? Live up to it. And so as I live into it, I need to know where are the areas that I tend to fall. And as we said last week, make no mistake, the enemy already knows your weaknesses. Do you? Are you self-aware? I know a lot of people aren't self-aware. Do you know your weaknesses? Because he does, right? Do you know what channels to avoid? What websites get you in trouble? What jobs you should stay away from? What relationships and people in your life at this point are not healthy for you? We don't give up on them forever because Jesus loves them. But right now, you got no business being around them because you know where that road's leading. Do you know the places not to go on Friday night? Right? Because he knows. And so I need to know my own weaknesses. And then I'm so glad Apostle Paul said in his letter to the Corinthians, and the verse up there is about temptation, but he says in 2 Corinthians 9, 2 Corinthians 12, that I have to keep rereading to myself because I know my weaknesses well, and they drive me crazy, and they get frustrating to me. But then remember, Paul says, where I'm weak, that's where he's strong. So where I'm weakest, he comes in and he's strongest. So you got to know where you're weakest. And then he says, I'll come in and I'll fight that battle for you. Because he's the one that fights our battles. He's the one. No one's ever told you this before, but God is your biker gang. So he's your biker gang. So he comes in. So that's what's cool, right? Is he comes in, so then I get to walk around like that kid with the big old smile on my face going, I'm confident now because my God's got this, right? Because he's the one fighting the battles for us. He just calls us to stand firm. So I got to know those areas that tend to come after me. And the second, I'd never thought of this before, but you think of all the different areas of our lives that we all have plans. We got financial plans, retirement plans, education plans, and relationship plans, and all those. But do I have a plan for kind of the most important thing in my life? Do I have a plan for my character? Do I have a plan to even grow into be somebody better than who I am, someone more like who I'm actually meant to be? That's what God's calling us to. He says, I made you righteous. Now I want you to live up to your identity. And so, do I have a plan? Thinking through, what is the next kind of thing I want to develop in my life? Is it gratitude? Is it heading to Thanksgiving? Is it learning to be more content and thankful? Is it learning to be generous? Is it kindness? What's the character thing I want to develop? Because this is a great truth, man, right here. Dallas Willard, you ever want to read some great intellectual theology stuff, man? He's an incredible Christian writer. You'd love it. He says, the most important thing about you, about your life, isn't what you do, it's who you are. Because that's the only thing you take with you into eternity. Oh, that's good right there, right? That's the only thing I take with me, not my degrees or anything I've achieved or haven't achieved here. I take who I am. So who are you? God is in the business of helping you become someone different. Not just do a bunch of religious stuff. Become someone different. And the someone different, by the way, it's the best version of you haven't even seen yet. He knows what it looks like because he designed you. And it's the version of you that looks the most like Jesus. And so everything that you do is meant to help you become something different. So for us as a church, by the way, I hope you never misunderstand when we're saying you should serve on this team or join us at outreach or give or pray. We're not giving you religious stuff to do. We're not ever, earning brownie points with God or whatever. We're trying to help you do stuff that's helping you become someone different. And we get to see that, right? When people are serving in youth, serving at some people, serving with me, hanging decorations at 7 a.m. on Saturday morning, around town, and they've never done it before, and they left saying, I want to do that again, and I want to keep bringing my kids. He brought his son. I want my kid to learn that. He's becoming someone different. And so every time you serve or you give or you pray for somebody, you're actually becoming, hopefully, more generous, more kind, more selfless, more compassionate, more content with what you have, more thankful. See, so God's always up to helping us become someone different. So that's how we wear that kind of breastplate of righteousness, how we live into that. The next piece, Paul starts talking about our shoes. I don't know, when I think about armor, I don't tend to think of kind of what's on your feet because I'm thinking of covering your whole body. So why does Paul talk about our shoes? Why is that so important? Well, I was thinking about this. Think about like football players. They're pretty covered in armor. Padding kind of covering most of the body and the head, obviously, and all of that. But I can be covered in all the padding I want as a football player. If I go out there in my socks, or I go out there in some pretty cruddy shoes, like I'm just slipping and falling all over. I'm honestly pretty worthless. Like just bench me because I'm pretty useless to the team. Doesn't matter how much padding and armor I got on. You got to have some good shoes with cleats if you really want to get anywhere, right? You're not going to get anywhere. Same for these guys in battle. You can be all armored up. Most of their battlefields, they're walking through mud and all this kind of stuff, and they're getting stuck. They can't make it through. It's going to be kind of worthless. And so Paul says, yeah, you can have all the armor, but man, you got to have the right shoes. You need the shoes that are, your feet have to be wearing, the gospel of peace. That sounds like a new line of shoes by Vans. Come try our new gospel of peace shoes or whatever. But and so you got to be wearing these peace shoes. And we talk about the gospel. That word really just means good news. Good news, the good news shoes. And so good news, well, what's the good news? What's so good about it? Well, the good news is already what we talked about. I don't have to get really good at being really good. God's the one who threw the robe on me, his amazing grace. So the good news is actually good news of peace, where there should be conflict between me and God. And some of you know that feeling. Either because you feel like he's mad at you or because you're mad at him. Where there should be conflict because I fall short all the time. There can be peace if I choose that I want his grace and that I want to follow him. And so the good news is actually that there's peace between me and God, and that there's meant to be peace between me and others. So I'm meant to kind of put on the peace shoes, and remember God gives us peace, and then go kind of bring that peace everywhere that I go. So how do we do that practically? Just two things. One is I got to resolve conflict quickly, right? I can't just avoid all conflicts. They're going to come. I got to keep short accounts. Got to resolve them quickly. That means between you and God. Listen, confession should always be a regular part of your prayer life. And we talk about confession. It's not like it was for me growing up. That confession isn't about, that's the time you go and sit and feel really bad about yourself. The word confess just means agree with. So when I confess my mistakes and my sins to God, it means I stop making excuses. Well, they made me do it. Well, at least I'm better than this person. Well, I've just been really tired and stressed out lately. So I just say, I agree, God. It's sin. I agree. I messed up. I got no excuse. And so I go and I agree with God. And then I say, no, I need some of that grace again. Remind me of that coat, righteousness you put on me. And so we go back and we do that. And then I'm meant to keep short accounts with other people, right? And if you haven't had a chance to practice resolving any conflicts lately, you're in luck because the holidays are coming. So you probably got all sorts of them waiting up, right? You get to see all sorts of people, exes and in-laws and relatives. It'll be great. And you can practice, right? So I have to be always trying to extend and try to find peace in those relationships. Paul says in Romans 12:18, I love what he says about peace, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everybody. And you say, I try, Carl, but they won't reconcile. My brother won't ever call me back. And, okay. God just said as far as it depends on you, so you're off the hook. You can't control what they do. Here's the challenge, though. Have you done all of your part yet? Right? Have I? As far as it depends on me, have I tried to reconcile yet? Have I gone first? Or I'm just waiting for them to go first because I want to win. All right? As far as it depends on you, live at peace. Then we get to bring peace together collectively. We get to go champion peace wherever we're at in our community, our world. You think our world needs any peace right now? Yeah. Southern California needs peace. So we get to be bringers of peace. Jesus actually said, blessed are the peacemakers. They're the people that will be called children of God. That's how important it was to him. And so when we're peacemakers, peace bringers, then we're bringing the peace that people need. We don't always get that reputation. Again, sometimes churches, religious people can be known as the opposite of peace bringers. They're the ones picking the fights and boycotting the stuff and always kind of known for what they're against instead of what they're for. But we're meant to be people, everyone knows what we're for. We're for grace. We're for peace, and we're for reconciliation. And so we get to bring peace. I'm telling you, this can work. This isn't just some like pie-in-the-sky ideology, theology. It works at a practical level. Just this year, you may have heard the story, but earlier this year, twice, we had the leaders of the town come to us. They came to me and said, hey, we want to host a discussion, or we want to have a discussion with local law enforcement, business owners, political leaders of the town, and try to work together on how do we best address some of the challenges, like with homeless and some of the transients. So would you host it, and will you be the mediator of it? All right? Now, why would they come to us to do that? I think because they see us as the peacemakers, the peace bringers. And so we did, right in this room, right in these chairs, twice this year. And we're scheduling our next one. And we didn't solve everything because these are complicated issues, but we took big steps forward. We're bringing peace. So you can be a peace bringer where you go. In fact, Paul, the one other place, he talks about feet. Great words here. Check it out in his letter to the Romans. Talks about feet. He says, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. Isn't that cool? He didn't say how beautiful are the words or the voice or the looks or the hair. I wish you would have said hair. But how beautiful is the hair, the feet of those who bring good news, right? But he says feet because our feet are wearing the good news of peace, the gospel of peace. How beautiful it is. I want you to remember those words as you head into your crazy holiday season. A whole lot of people you don't want to bring peace to. Office parties, people shopping on Black Friday, relatives at gatherings. I got a lot of places to not bring any peace. Are you going to be a peace bringer? Are you going to bring good news, or do you bring bad news? All right? So he says, if you're going to stand, man, you got to be firmly planted, fitted with peace, because that has to flow through us everywhere that we go. All right, one more left.
That's good.
Let's
That's
go
good.
after it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I have beautiful feet. My wife says I have hobbit feet. Maybe one of y'all can
yeah.
explain to me.
My wife always wants me to
what
get a
that is.
pedicure, but I've
I
never
know,
have.
man. Her wives
I
are
felt
always
too
on the
manly
feet.
to do it.
So he comes to this next part, and this is kind of the first one that he says, you got to pick it up, right? You got to pick it up off the ground. You got to get it. And he says, and in addition to all this, take up the shield of faith with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. So he says, he starts with this, he says, lift up your shield. And so in the Roman time period that we're talking about, the shield would have been about 3 feet wide by about 4.5 feet tall. And I got a good picture of them here. And this is a formation that they would go into battle in. And so you notice that the shield's protecting pretty much the entire body of the Roman soldier. Their feet are a little exposed, but they would kneel down often, and they have over the top. And this was a very popular battle formation. And so they would go and grab their shield after, they've tightened their belt, they have their armor on, they would get their shield. And so that shield is our faith. And so oftentimes we think of it just as our faith in God, just believing or just the thought, I believe, I have faith. But it's also his faithfulness to us. More oftentimes when our faith gets weary, his faithfulness to us in those difficult times, that's what carries us through. And so Paul says, take up your shield, hide behind it. He wants us to stick it in front of us. And God is our ultimate shield. He is always faithful to us. It says in that song that we sang earlier, I've never been forsaken. He's the ultimate shield, and we're called to pick up that faith in him and to hide behind it because the enemy's arrows are coming from all different directions. In that same time period, the arrows, they would shoot them high up in the air, and they would often be lit on fire. And you didn't know exactly where they were coming from, and you would just be kind of behind your shield ducking. And how oftentimes is our Christian walk just like that? We don't know where the attacks are always coming from. We can't wake up every morning, anticipate what's going to happen, what the enemy's going to have against us that day, or our mind's going to war. But what we always have is a shield to stand behind. Our faith in God and his faithfulness in us. We can duck behind. And it says, one of the things I like to think of is they would soak their shield in water because it had a leather front to it. And that's what would extinguish. It would extinguish out those flames. And so how often are we soaking ourselves in the faith? And so how do we do that? The very first one is we recall yesterday's victories to build strength today. Psalm 77:12 says, I ponder and meditate on your mighty deeds. How often are we thinking, recalling? We're looking at those prayers that have been answered in our lives. We're looking at the awesome things he's already done. And if you're here this morning and you're not a believer, and maybe you're wrestling with faith, or maybe you don't know who God is or who Jesus is, the very first victory that he's already given all of us is the power to accept him as our Savior and be eternally taken care of. Something that we couldn't do on our own. So that's the very first one. So if you ever get so down and so broken and you're so just filled with these thoughts that you can't get rid of, that's the very first one. You are a child of God. He told you who you are. You're created in his image. These are truths that we can go back to. These are the things so we recall. When has he been faithful to you? When has he answered that prayer? And the second thing is replenishing our faith with actions. So just like Carter said earlier, it's not that we just want you to come to the church and serve and, hey, we need someone to run sound or I need someone to play guitar or sing. But it's when we're acting out our faith. It's when we're here and we're seeing God do things in other people's lives. We're seeing God do things in our lives. That is where our faith is strengthened. I was in Budapest, Hungary when I was a teenager, and one of the most powerful moments of my life was running a baseball camp for a bunch of inner city kids inside of Budapest, and they didn't have nothing, and their clothes were tattered, and they were dirty, and they didn't know where food was coming from every day, and they were brokenhearted. But when we played baseball with them, they were excited. But when we told them about Jesus, their faces and their countenance changed. They began to walk with God in that week, and they got put into an orphanage that I was there with that orphanage, and they learned about God. When you see that, when you see a 12-year-old child's face change in the moment because he realizes it's okay that I'm dirty, it's okay that I don't have everything because there's someone that's bigger and greater than me who's got it all under control. Buddy, that will change you forever. That changed me forever. And so we have to be faith in action. James says, faith with no action is dead. It's active. And the third is reconnect with other Christ followers to battle together. Just like that formation. Sometimes we just got to put our shields together because the enemy's attacks are strong, they're swift, they're repetitive, they come over and over and over. And sometimes we get tired. It just happens. Sometimes we're ducked down and those arrows, they keep coming, and I'm sitting there and I want to have faith and I want to have faith and I want to have faith, but I'm weary and I'm weak. But I'm still ducked behind that shield. And it's times like that when that friend, that Christian brother or sister, that other person who has their faith, and they're strong in that moment, they step out in front of you, and they start taking those arrows with you, and for you, and beside you, and they're arm to arm, linked together, marching forward, and standing firm, because the enemy is going to come, that's a promise, but God's promises are greater and stronger, and he's promised that he's going to stand there in front of us to protect us, to guard us. And so when we're together, he meant for us to do this together. This isn't an isolated thing. This isn't a one-man band. This is all of us together. So this week, as you go about your week, as you digest all this information, what's the part of the armor that you need to work on? What's the part of the armor maybe you haven't put on yet? Be praying this week. Pray. I want you to pray, Jesus, what part of this armor? Do I have a hole in this part of my armor? Do I not know enough truths? Am I not guarding my mind with truth? Am I not keeping peace? Am I self-righteous? Reveal to me what it is that I need to work on this week. Because the command's there, put on the full armor of God. And God didn't dump the armor in a big pile across the battlefield and say, run across. No. He is the armory. He lays it before you and just says, hey, all you have to do is put it on. So which piece do you need to put on this week? Which piece is it that you're missing? And be praying that God would reveal that to you and show you that.
That's a good challenge, especially with, 6 weeks left in our year, and whether you've had a great year or not a great one, you just want it to be over, or you feel like it's one where you backslid. Doesn't matter, start now, right? What piece of armor am I going to put on next? We were kind of talking personally, like, well, what piece do you need next? What do I need? For me, it was, I think it's shield of faith. I think I picture my shield as like this big, and I love that visual that it covers all of me. I still let kind of doubt and anxiety about just different decisions that we're trying to make, just all this kind of stuff going on, and I'm like, man, I got to get quicker at picking up the shield, right? If I'm not quick enough at returning to faith, then it's like some of the arrows make it through, so I love that picture. We just wanted to close with a thought from maybe one of the greatest Christian authors that ever lived. If you've ever heard of C.S. Lewis, if you ever watched one of the Chronicles of Narnia movies, read those books, he wrote those, but he wrote a lot of great, Christian kind of nonfiction, growing your faith books. Amazing guy. And he actually started his life, though, really strong atheist. Not just like didn't care, like really wanted to argue people out of believing in God. And so he would have all these debates all the time. And actually one of the guys he would sit with and debate about faith was the guy who wrote Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien. So they had this great friendship. And actually J.R.R., he gets the extra R because he's just that cool. So J.R.R. Actually argued and helped C.S. Lewis finally come to say, you know what, I just can't deny God anymore. I just can't deny my life. Like, he's just real. And so total, 180. And now he spends the rest of his life writing, some of the great kind of Christian stuff ever written. But what's powerful is he says, I actually don't even know the experience of seeking God. For me, it's always been the other way around. And so he would say, my whole life, it's just been knowing that God was the one pursuing me. And we just want you to hear, as we talk about spiritual battle and, this idea there's enemies, forces kind of coming after you. Again, it's never about fear, because I want you to know this. You have a God who's always pursuing you. Always pursuing you. Always waiting to home with arms wide open, waiting for you to just come home so he can give you that hug and throw the robe on you and throw the party. And so he's pursuing you more than your enemy is, and he's not going to give up on it. But C.S. Lewis said these words, and I found this quote, and I was like, whoa, it's just kind of like this kind of gut punch. I'll be honest, kind of taps into my competitiveness a little bit, and Drew's as well. And so I just love these words. See what you think. C.S. says, my prayer is that when I die, all of hell will rejoice that I'm out of the fight. Wow, them's fighting words right there, right? He wants hell to rejoice. Thank God C.S. Lewis is gone, and he has passed away now. Thank God he's gone, because we're sick of all the good work he was doing here. Wow. Think about that, right? I say, yeah, God, that is what I want to be in my life. I want to be bringing so much peace and so much grace and pointing so many people to Jesus that, man, the enemy just kind of can't wait till I'm done. Right? I want that to be true of us as a church. If we ever have to, if this building ever has to shut down or we ever had to close our doors someday, the enemy goes, good, finally. I'm glad those freaking people at New Break are gone because I was sick of it, man. They're always blessing schools and first responders and helping people who are going through divorce and through addiction and, just spreading grace and bringing peace everywhere. Thank God they're finally done. Right? That's what he says. He's like, that's what the armor of God can do for you. Not just help you kind of grit your teeth and barely make it through life. It can help you stand that firm, do that kind of life. And we have a great song that I think can be this beautiful kind of battle cry as you go into the week. And so we wanted to close with that. But I'd love to pray over you as we get ready for that. So let's pray. God, we come to you and we ask, give us the courage to do this stuff. I pray that no one leaves today afraid